I know you've always wanted to hear two dudes talking about writing. Well, this time on the Cameron Journal podcast, I'm talking with Dutch Simmons. He is a writer, um, and we just kind of riff on writing as a fascinating background in finance. And so we're just sitting around and talking about writing and the submission process and all the kind of crazy stuff it takes to be a writer and how sometimes seemingly masochistic it can be. We talk a little bit about process and creativity and how books and writing come together. So it's another writing episode, but it's a fascinating interview. He's a very interesting guy. So this time on the Cameron Journal podcast, join me in my interview with Dutch Simmons. Let's go. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are pleased to welcome Dutch Simmons. He is a writer. He's been in the Texas Observer, among other places, and we're going to just be writer nerds for about the next 45 minutes. Welcome, Dutch. How are you?
Cameron, thanks for having me. This is fantastic.
Excellent. So I want to dive right into your background. How did you get into writing? How did you get here?
Well, I think like most writers, I'm a masochist at heart, and you have all these stories inside you, and you kind of want to put it together, you want to throw it down, and the problem is, as real life goes on around you, you never really make the time. And serendipitously enough, I found myself in a situation where I was having an adult timeout, where I had nothing but time, and had the opportunity to start putting a lot of my thoughts down on paper, eventually leading to being able to teach a creative writing class. And once I saw the reaction I was getting out from some of the folks in class versus how I felt writing, it all just kind of came together, really, for the lack of a better word. And, since then, I think the worst possible thing that could happen is submitting your first piece for publishing or for public approval and having it accepted. And, that's probably akin to mainlining heroin at that point. So since I'm kind of taking off from there, I guess.
Yeah. So why don't you give us a idea of what stories you like to tell?
Yeah. The funny thing is I had this conversation the other day with a couple of writers because I have a hard time distinguishing between fiction and creative nonfiction.
One's true and one's not. So that
yeah, exactly. And that's the part that was disturbing, was going, okay, what world am I sort of living in that I can't quite determine how much is real and how much is not? And I recognize when all is said and done, most of my writing starts from a premise of what I know or what I've experienced, and then stuff gets woven into it. So a lot of my stuff has a tendency to be on the somewhat dark side. I clearly wrestle with some issues with my father, but it's more often than not, there's a grain of truth in just about everything that gets put out there. I'm not a science fiction kind of writer. I can't build those kind of worlds. It's only the stuff, luckily enough, rightly or wrongly, that I've experienced that I can kind of play around with.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of people like to write from life. And I struggle with that because I'm much the opposite. Mm-hmm. I prefer to make things up from whole cloth. Mostly because I also am a journalist and do the news. So by the time I get to writing, I'm quite done with real life.
And the problem is real life is just sometimes if anything, as of late, stranger than fiction anyway. So, good Lord.
Yes, yeah. So I want to enter a universe of, happiness and complete satisfaction rather than the complete train wreck of me trying to explain to people what's wrong with society and why our government is broken and all this type of thing. Tell us about your observational process. What do you look for in the world around you that informs your writing?
Unfortunately, I think I've lived that old Chinese curse of, be careful of what you wish for, and may you live in interesting times. I've had the benefit of experiencing some really interesting times, I guess, for the lack of a better word, that's been more than enough to fill a certain level of fodder. I don't think I've felt like at any point where I've had to struggle to come up with a story. It's simply been a matter of, being able to organize my thoughts enough and trying to figure out, how to coherently get it down on paper or laptop, if you will. And the issue really is, I love the idea of flash fiction. I love the 1,000 words or less kind of stories. But I've also got, 4 manuscripts for full, fictional novels, behind me right now. And, I'm working on a TV treatment. So it's hard sometimes figuring out, like, a smaller piece can all of a sudden magically become a much larger piece and sort of run off untamed and unchecked. And that's probably the hardest part sometimes, just kind of keeping things in check.
Yes. No, that makes sense. I think one of the advantages of age as I have gotten older is I find I've gone through more stuff and I have more weird experiences, and therefore I have many more stories to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be perfectly honest, I don't understand how someone writes a novel at 19 years old.
It's beyond me.
I didn't have a clue about anything at 19 years old. And I lived a very eclectic youth. I worked in state government at 17 years old. Like, I was chapter president of Young Republicans at 18, literally the day I turned 18.
Yeah, I mean,
because I'd already been involved.
Think about it, like
I'd already had like a glass of illegal wine at 17 with the Archbishop of Denver. Like I did not have a boring adolescence, but I could not write a novel at 19 years old.
Well, the funny thing is, like,
how that works.
When you listen to, like, it's crazy when you listen to some of the songwriters who are, I look at Adele's first album. I look at what Billie Eilish has done. I look at some of the other stuff that's out there, and the things that they're putting out at like sub 20. And I'm just banging my head, going, "Where did you get this world experience?" Or how, so be it. But even still, even if I had, and I had done some interesting things, or I had some compelling stories, I guess, in my youth, but I didn't have the wherewithal to put it down on paper and really understand what the hell I was writing. It was, if anything, I think, anyone who fancies themselves a writer has that one moment way too early in their writing endeavors where they take themselves way too seriously. And I definitely recall at a very young and impressionable age, picturing myself as, a next Hemingway, and decided the only way I could write would be, with gin and tonics in front of me at any time of day or whatever. And it was all just pure tripe and trash that I was writing, and just shelved everything for years. So yeah, I don't understand how these folks can do it at such an early age.
Yeah, I mean, you were a bit ahead of me. I didn't even have designs on being the next Hemingway or that I should be drinking alcohol. I this is going to sound funny. A bit of a true confession sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people say don't get into writing for the fame and the money. That's kind of why I got into it. I know that's sad.
No, but you know what?
My reader's not going to be happy that I
I
said
don't
that.
think there's.
But that's literally kind of why I got it. Like, I read all the books that I could get my hands on writing, all this sort of thing. And at the back, they always, especially back then, this is like 2005, it was like, oh, they're an essayist, whatever have you. And I'm like, that's me. That's what I want to be. I want to be Cameron, novelist, essayist, all this type of thing. This is what I want to sign up for. And I didn't really have a clue on how to write anything that was actually going to work. I started out doing short story remakes of old radio shows.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, and so I would kind of take the same concepts and ideas and I would kind of make it my own, and nothing ever came of that. It was purely for exercise. But like that's kind of how I got my start and all of that. And I was just looking for interesting things that I could maybe write about, whatever have you. But it took me a very long time to kind of make that happen, just because I was comically not very good in the beginning.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's just a very odd sort of thing. So it's interesting to see, kind of your career trajectory and how you kind of wrote all this stuff and it wasn't very good and you kind of shelved it and then kind of came back years later with a whole different perspective.
And the funny thing is, like, I guess the pivotal point for me, like maybe in college was, at the time, I just assumed, I'm going to be, I'm going pre-med. That's the route. And I hated chemistry. I hated biology. I hated every aspect of medicine, with the exception of maybe like medical dramas. And
oh no,
yeah. So that's not a great way to start. And then at some point in some of my classes where there was a lot of paper writing that was due, and I had a couple of like poli-sci classes where you were allowed to, write what you wanted, sort of. And so I really enjoyed satire. And all of a sudden I realized, like, hey, I'm getting decent grades in this. Maybe I could stick with it. But again, shelved it until, my first career in finance, where I hated writing up, analysis on, you name it, private equity, whatever garbage. But
people would be people would be surprised how many intensely political people are also artists.
Oh, yeah.
And how many artists have a background in political science. My art mentor, who founded the San Jose Museum of Modern Art, her undergrad was in political science. My undergrad and my first graduate degree are both in political science and international relations.
Yeah, same here.
Yes, Condoleezza Rice, who used to be Secretary of State, she was a classically trained pianist and switched to poli-sci.
Right.
There's a lot of artists in poli-sci.
Well, I think you realize, I think the tie into it is you have a certain worldview and it informs you. And, on some level, you want to write to make it seem better or idealistic or whatever it may be. And you also realize you have that ability to just write in that space. And I loved it. And like I said, fast forward to, my first career, if you will, I had more fun writing satirical articles about the industry than I did about the stuff I was being paid to write for. And the worst thing that can happen for a writer is, like I said, is God bless it if you get paid for an article, or you get some sort of acclaim and notoriety, because in the end, we're all just bastards to our ego. And, like you said, I don't think anyone goes into it saying, I just want to put some piece of art out there. I mean, it's great if you do, but at some point you're saying, man, I think I could really make something that could take off. Like, I think I could write that novel. I think I could write that screenplay, whatever it may be, until you just get rejected enough and you're like, all right, maybe I need to really rethink this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I just had my first major literary publishing in 2020.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it took me a very long time to get there. And it was with 34th Parallel magazine, and they were super awesome, and there was a full photo spread and bio, and, and it was online and in print, which for a first publishing is way more than most people get.
Absolutely.
Like most people are lucky if they can make it into it's like, oh, I made it into this one anthology. This is huge. And my first one was, oh no, it was a full short story from my collection the same month the collection came out, and there were 5 photos and a complete bio. Like,
right.
You know, I think it took me 15 years, but I did good. Like, you know, we did really well. And it is. There are kind of 2 things that have happened. One, it's like, okay, I'm on a different plane of existence now, which is weird. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other thing that's kind of odd is it almost feels like, you know, the bar has been raised in terms of now it's not just anywhere, you know, it's like, if I can get in anywhere, that'll be okay. It's almost like, okay, now things that I do in the future have to be at least that good.
Right.
You know, or
and
be at that sort of caliber.
That is the worst. God, it's brutal when you first get a couple things published, especially in decent spaces. And I guess to some degree, we're blessed these days where there are so many outlets. Like there's more literary magazines than I ever knew. But there also comes a point where it's like, well, I don't want to put it here because they only have a following of X number of people, and I really need it to go here because this has 20,000 followers or whatever. You know, and you just kind of keep building, and at some point you have to take a step back and say, listen, these are not all going to be, you know, short stories of the year, you know, pushcart pieces. Like, you just have to be a little realistic, and there's nothing worse if you've had a couple of early pieces accepted, that when you start getting rejections and you almost, God, it's so egotistical and awful. You're like, wait, don't they know who I am? What's wrong with this? And, you know, I just wrote an article for Envy magazine on writing, and just talking about how important it is to have editors and beta readers, because it's so easy to be surrounded by friends and sycophants who think, wow, everything you do is great and it's wonderful. And a lot of times it's just shite, for the lack of a better word. And you need somebody to kind of keep you in check, or to say, hey, listen, this is good, but because I God knows I'm still learning. You know, I mean, it's crazy at this point in life to, you know, I know I want to write what I want to write. And I think that's the hardest part about having, you know, submitting novels and having them rejected and getting certain criticism and saying, I don't agree with your criticism. And I know that you're the agent and you're the person in the industry, but there comes a point where you say, I can't change certain aspects of whatever's I'm writing on because it takes away from the whole heart of it, or the point of view, or whatever it may be. And it's really hard trying to make that decision, saying, okay, if I change this, it could get published, but it's not what my intention was. So I still haven't figured out how to get through that yet at all.
I have 2 things on what you've just said. One, and I would be interested to see what your response is. I don't hire beta readers.
Mm-hmm.
Flat out. I select who does my editing very carefully. I look for people who are going to get my work. I've had very horrible experiences with editors in the past. I've literally had people send stuff back with just start do over, and it's like, that's not helpful.
Right? Yeah, like, exactly.
You've given me nothing. Just I one time I hired this woman to do some editing for me, and she just sent back with just like rewrite. It's like that doesn't give me anything. It was fine the way it was. And so I pick who edits my stuff incredibly carefully. I don't release it in advance. I put it together and I send it out for review. I'm extremely, extremely careful.
And I think that's a great way to do it.
Read my work before publication.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, because I have a very distinct style of writing, and either you're going to like it or you're not. But I can't really change it and tailor it too much to suit everyone's individual tastes, if you will, and nor do I want to. But much like you said, you know, if you come back to me with an edit and say, all right, I like this, but here's where it's confusing and here's why, Okay, great. I had an editor, and I just posted this the other day, and I, out of respect to the editor, obviously, I didn't name the person, but I wrote an article about when I was a search and rescue worker during 9/11. And I was basically drawing parallels through the article about how it was hell on earth. And there's a sentence in there, something about, we searched the banks of the river Styx daily, hoping to find souls trapped in the mud. And her question was,
oh, that's a beautiful image.
Thanks. I like that. I was really, really proud of that. And
that's very good.
And she came back to me and said, I'm confused here. Are you talking about the literal river Styx? Because I'm kind of lost geographically. And
no, madam, it's a metaphor.
And I just didn't even know how to react to that. And I said, I don't know where to go with that. It's not even like an ego thing. It's just simply, if you can't read the first couple of paragraphs and understand where I'm going with this, like, it wasn't like it was just, a casual allusion or just tossed out there. The whole thing led to that. Like, all right, I don't think you understand this, and you're just not going to be the right person. And oddly enough, I took it from their place and sent it somewhere else, and they immediately got it and like, we love this, So you're absolutely right. You have to be super careful. I'm learning, trying to be consistent with the same people who do it, who understand your style and your flow. So.
No, I've run 3 magazines. If I read that, I would throw out advertising to publish that. Be like, that front page ad that's $6,000, chuck it. This is that good.
Right.
Like, put that in immediately. Like, yeah. The other thing that I was also thinking about with all of that, in terms of agents and all that type of thing, and one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of people making smart decisions about their work. My debut novel, I finished it finally. The editing process was really wonderful. I hired someone here in Seattle to do it. And she was also a sensitivity reader, which was helpful because the book takes place in the recent past, and it has a lot of heavy subjects. There is child sexual abuse in it, which is the motivation of a murder. At one point, the main character goes to prison. All of part 2 is him being in prison. And he also kind of has this weird struggle with his sexuality and briefly becomes a gay prostitute. In part 3. Also,
so there's some heavy stuff there, right?
Yes, and I kind of wanted to make sure that it was kind of acceptable. And one of the things she did towards the end is there was this bit that was kind of, it was about his girlfriend, and it was kind of very misogynistic. And she said, not only is this sexist and misogynistic, it doesn't help the story.
Right.
And I looked at it for a while. I was a bit offended at first. And then I said, actually, no, you're right. This doesn't move the story forward. And the whole passage got cut, didn't make the book.
And it's amazing when somebody that is the funny thing.
It was so good. I appreciated it. It was good.
Because the first time somebody says that, it's sort of like they're saying, listen, your kid's ugly. And I'm like, I'm sorry, come again? And you have to look at it from another person's point of view, provided you trust that point of view. And, I get it. Like, there are certain things where there are times where you get so wed to a story and emotionally vested in it. And you need to be able to take that step back and have someone say, listen, I get where you're going with this, but this part here is killing it, or this is dragging it. And I'm sorry that it's important to you. Cut it out and put it in something else somewhere else.
No, absolutely. And and to that, when I finished that process, and that was so productive, and I am very good about edits. I don't read them. I only read the comments for what's needed more. I don't get nitpicky about edits. But that was the only one in 400 pages her and I went back and forth on, because I had an idea in my head of a different way I wanted him to appear. And she's like, not only is this not great for 2019, because the book came out in 2020, not only is this not great for today, it doesn't even move your story forward. Let's chuck it. But I sent that book out to probably 75 different agencies. I literally was submitting 3 days, 12 hours a day. That's all I did.
And that whole process is draining because you want to feel like you're fresh with each query letter. And exactly. Believe me, I learned that too. If there's occasionally like an agent that I've interacted with, online or something, and there's a reason to kind of make it, stand out a little bit, like, hey, pick me. But the reality is, like, I've gone through that too, and it's all like cut and paste and make sure I change the right name. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. But to that, I then had two really major agencies ask me for full manuscripts almost immediately upon receipt. Like, I rocketed from the slush pile to the read pile in about a half hour. And and then started a very interesting emotional roller coaster. And this is why I tell people you have to kind of make decisions on what's right for your project. And that is, I had them reply and ask for a full manuscript. That was kind of the first emotional. Oh my gosh, yeah. And then the same day I got another one. And I was kind of like, oh, what am I going to do if they both represent this? I have no idea what to do. I'm going to have to call my dad and be like, choose for me. What do I do? Like I'm going to have to call. Yeah, I'm going to have to call my dad and be like, what the hell am I going to do here? And so as I'm trying to like get my mind around like, oh my goodness, two agencies just asked for your full manuscript, and what are you going to do if one or both of them say yes? And then immediately back to the station when they both took the full manuscript and then both said no.
The roller coaster is just
and I got personal responses and I got feedback and all this type of thing. I got invitations to submit again in the future, all this sort of thing. But it was like I went from like potential bidding war I didn't know how to handle to none of the above in like the space of like 72 hours. And then eventually I didn't get any response from anyone else. And I just said, screw it, we're going to go forward and self-publish it myself. And that's what we did.
The funny thing, too, is it's so much of it. Every time I submit, like I see images of Sally Field at the Oscars going, you like me, you really like me. and in my mind, that's what I want. And the sad thing is, it's in the back of my head, I keep telling myself, and I remember some of my earlier query letters where I was just spilling my guts on the page. Just, I want a champion for this novel. I want somebody who wants to be a part of this whole redemption arc for me personally, and America Loves a Comeback Story and all that. And then I just realized, I'm like, yeah, they just want to know if the book's any good. Like, we'll worry about the rest later. We can handle the marketing. And I remember talking about it with one agent where I thought I was really far down the road, saying, listen, I've been on, TV. I've done tours. I've done speaking. I can do this. I'm going to make you look like a hero when it comes to the whole marketing tour. Just get it done. And, we have this great rapport. And then you get it back saying, unfortunately, I have to pass right now. I'm like, how is that possible? It's so rife with masochism, what we do every time we sit down on the laptop or however you do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the only industry where you have to talk about good rejection. It's like, oh, this was a good rejection because it was sent from their phone, which means it was personal and not boilerplate, which has happened to me. And I was very excited to be kind of like, oh my goodness, he was probably sitting in the back of a taxi somewhere in New York and wrote me back and said, no, thanks, not right now. And we have to cherish the fact that it was a not boilerplate rejection.
And the fact that other writers will support you and be like, oh my God, that's great. Oh,
yes. No, and I wrote a long post on Reddit one time a couple years ago, and everybody who worked in publishing hated me for this, but I literally stood up and said, this industry is broken. We put people through terrible, terrible things, and for what? Really, let's back out 30,000 feet. We put people through awful, emotional horror for what? And it is completely untransparent. It's worse than Hollywood. Hollywood, there is a formula. There are beats, there are pages. If you can literally buy a screenplay book and do what it says, you can probably hawk a script for $20,000.
And the funny thing is, much like you said,
and there's like one convention you go to, but books, it's completely esoteric.
Well, and the funny thing is, when you think about it, and I started writing about this, and a couple of folks in some of the writing circle have been like, dude, you don't want to do this. And I was like, I don't, when all's said and done, I don't give a shit how many queries an agent gets. Take the 5 minutes to write a personal note back when you're rejecting it saying, hey, you know what? I apologize. Love the premise, but it's just not work. Like, don't give me the fake real, response, which is still a boilerplate thing. And you can tell, just throw a couple of things in there showing that, you know what? I recognize that you put some aspect of your soul into this and took months or however long it took to write it. And you know what? It's just not going to be a fit for me for whatever reason. Just give that person that moment, because the highs you get, like you say, from a good rejection allow you to sit back down and go, all right, I still have some chances here. I've got some hope. I've got potential, versus like the agents who don't even bother responding is infuriating.
Of the 72 I sent out for my novel, I only heard from 15.
Absolutely. And to me, like, I get it. I get your inbox is full. I get you're working on so many projects. But again, like they said in The Godfather, this is the business you chose. And, unfortunately, I've seen karma too much at this point in life already. And I recognize that, for every agent who has something submitted to them that they don't respond to, that turns out to be the next blockbuster or whatever, it's very rare. Like, it's very rare where you're going to be able to turn around and say, hey, remember I submitted this to you and you didn't even bother to respond to me? I just want that level of, it's not like acknowledgement. Hey, you know what? You're actually putting your heart and soul into something, and, I recognize it. Just doesn't work for me. Good luck. Thanks.
I think I felt the same until I had some conversations after my great failure on my first novel, which, I mean, I look back now and say, well, Cameron, you got 2 agents to call you back on your debut novel. That doesn't happen to anyone. Right. Be grateful. And then 3 months later, you publish something. Just be grateful. And I have 2 people. One is my editor, Liz Williams in the UK, who's a huge British sci-fi author, and she's worked with everybody that you know. The other one is my dear friend, R.J. Stewart, he used to work for the BBC. I think he was musical director for the BBC years ago, all this type of thing. And I was calling them both being like, how did this happen? Like, they asked for a full manuscript. Like, how on earth could they have passed on this? And my friend Liz Williams, she said, that's not surprising. It happens all the time. You're in the 1% of writers who got read. That means you no longer live in the slush pile. That puts you head and shoulders above 99% of people who do this. She's like, you didn't get published, but you basically made it. And it's a weird. You now play with those of us who are the big boys.
Right. Because then invariably, then you start getting the stories of like, do you know how many times so and so wrote something and trashed it and it was rejected before it became the Bible? Like, I get it, and listen, I understand that. For me, it's like, what is the secret sauce to finding the right person to represent it? And
oh, I agree.
It is. It's like I think the thing that's really interesting is when they do these like the Twitter pit mads or whatever, where everybody gets jacked up on coffee for the entire day and just submits all day long, hoping that 180 characters later, someone's gonna, some agent's gonna go, okay, I need this, and then you start looking through and seeing what gets liked and everything else going. why not even waste this day? No one cares about a dark comedy right now. If I can't, tweak the characters, tweak something to fit the current sensibilities of the week, it's just not going to happen. I love when I see, the number of agents who are like looking for the next, where the crawdads sing or you name it. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'd like to write that too. I don't know what the hell it is, but if that's what you want, let me know. But
well, that actually goes to the point. My other friend, RJ Stewart, so after I get off with Liz and she's like, you play with the big boys now, welcome to the club. And I'm like, we should have jackets. And I was sitting down to dinner with my friend RJ, and he said, here's why the publishing industry is broken. And this man has a major psychotic hatred of the publishing industry, even though he's been doing it for 40 years. And he said, the problem is with all these agents and things, the sheer volume of utter crap that they receive on a nearly hourly basis is so overwhelming that even when something is really good or has a lot of promise or potential or is worth reviewing a full manuscript of, there is absolutely simply no humanly possible way, even at the largest agencies, they could take on absolutely everything they wanted. So even, he's like, someone obviously liked it, your query letter and everything, and your sample stood out great. He's like, that's lovely. And then someone looked over, they probably scanned through the first 50 pages to see if it was something. And they might have even liked that, but there's all these sort of other pressures. Then he's like, but the problem is that to even just break through all the crap that they get on an hourly basis is an achievement of itself. And this is to your point. This industry is so masochistic that we have to be happy that we just managed to break through the really horrible stuff for someone to even pay attention. Please tell me another industry where this is what goes on. Like, it is, I mean, imagine if they ran Wall Street this way. Like, imagine if we had to be kind of like, well, we know your earnings were not that great this quarter, but, at least you managed to not be as bad as some of the companies. Yeah,
you're not completely bankrupt.
CNBC would be out of business by next week if we started trading equities on the basis of, well, at least your earnings weren't so shitty. You couldn't run an economy that way. But in the writing industry, this is a completely acceptable.
Well, and the funny thing too is the stuff that makes you nuts also is, and absolutely no disrespect to some of the authors out there who put out 20, 30 plus books, and like, listen, I would love to own. I don't care if I didn't get anything ever published. If I could own the rights to the algorithm that John Grisham has to churn out novels, I mean, it's unbelievable how you can have some folks, once you get that cachet, to just get something out there.
Oh yeah.
I argued with someone the other day that the comment I got back on a full manuscript, that had been looked at was, really love it, but I just feel like there's too much detail and buildup. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Like, you want backstory. It's all pertinent to the novel and the main character's development and everything else. And meanwhile, I'm reading Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and the first 50 pages, at least so far, are variations on explaining why it's gray, dark, cold, and rainy. And the person said, listen, that's Cormac McCarthy. You can get away with it. And I'm like, but he couldn't always, I'm sure his first novel wasn't that. Like, I don't know how to justify it, I guess. And
he also published in a very different literary environment. That book is several decades old now. And back then, people had a patience for that they don't really have today. The thing that your book probably suffers from, and I'll use myself as an example first, because my first novel suffered from this. I modeled my book after a book by Jhumpa Lahiri called The Lowland. And her book, the whole book hangs on one murder that happens about 100 pages in. And it takes place in India because she's from India. And when I read The Lowland, and my book has the same thing. The whole thing hangs on one murder. A young man murders his stepfather with a cast iron frying pan for molesting his sister. And when I read The Lowland, I'm like, oh, that's how you hang a book on one seminal moment. Perfect. I know what to do now. And the one I think thing that my book lacked and why it didn't get picked up, the murder did not happen in the 50-page sample.
Tammy, you are preaching
it
the
did
choir.
happen in the full.
Good God.
But if you only read the first 50 pages, and I told my Hannah, I said I should have reformatted it and made the font smaller because the murder's on page 70 and I couldn't fit it in.
I know exactly where you're going with that.
And I left it in a big font and double space to be read, and I said I should have reformatted it.
I completely understand that, because for me, the book is a slow build to get to the final, what ends up happening. And to that point, what I ended up doing was rewriting the first chapter, literally writing a second first chapter, if you will, which is basically tying in the absolute end and then bringing it back full circle, just because of that reason where people are like, I need more to be tied in and compelled. Why do I want to read this? And I guess, got it. Now I feel like it's my age where I'm like, don't people want to be drawn into something and taken for a ride rather than, the Da Vinci Code where it's every 3 pages he's running and taking a plane and going somewhere else and this and that, and it's nonstop. Like, I want to believe there's still room for a quiet, compelling, dark, quirky, whatever you want to call it, but something that shows a full arc. And that's been my argument every time.
I think you have to have a little. It's like a roller coaster. You have to have a little rise before the big rise. And so if I had to do it all over again, I would revisit the beginning and I would try to front load some more of the action. I'm the person, I like to establish normalcy, and then I like to screw with it, and then have all the action afterwards.
If you draw the parallel draw the parallel to having sex, want to have a little foreplay here. Don't want to just jump right in. Like, build it up and let it kind of turn into what it is. So ideally there is a big finish.
Right, but I think with writing, to keep this sexual metaphor going, it's important to reveal the goods early on and make more
so at least you know what you're working with and getting into.
Unzip the pants early, lift the skirt early. Yeah, exactly. Reveal the goods early. Kind of and that's something I'm facing right now. I'm working on this. Will be the first book of my mystery series. And in this book, the murder doesn't happen for a while. It's kind of like Murder, She Wrote, where the murder doesn't happen until the bottom half of the show. The murder doesn't happen for a while. And I'm kind of like, well, we need some action earlier on. I'm on chapter 3. It's time for some shooting and things to happen. We need to, get something going.
You need to hold that attention span. It's...
Yeah,
I get it, and it's funny because when you hear it, again, when you have that emotional investment in the book, saying no, you just need to read the whole thing, and then you'll get it, and then you'll love it and understand it. Not everybody's in your head and understands that. You need to have those things that keep hooking you back in and keep drawing you back in, and I get it, and that's when you go back to the edits and you go, all right, let's figure this out again. Let me look at it with new eyes and try to take that all into consideration. And it's
and that's why in the case of the book that I'm working on right now, I am. I was kind of like, okay, I have this, the detective is here and his girlfriend is having an affair with his business partner. And I was kind of like, that she gets killed later, but there's some of that we can front load.
Right.
Let's push some of that earlier. That will get people emotionally invested. So if our dear detective is in danger and then suddenly has to figure out, why are people shooting at me? This is good. This is compelling, sort of thing. Like, to kind of give that early sort of rise that gets people interested. That is, when you look at the big players, Grisham, Baldacci, these folks, the principal action of the book is happening by chapter 3. They rush right in to whatever it is. And I'm a big presidential thrillers, political science major. Big presidential thrillers guy. And it often is, the lone wolf agent and the government's collapsing and all this sort of thing. The action, or even the Jack Reacher series, they really front load the action. And so that's something that I'm trying to be better about in my work. The other book I'm trying to finish before I start my MFA is not that. Because it takes place on a farm and it's slow.
They're not hotbeds of activity more often than not.
Quickly.
No, it's...
Yes, I mean this book is a very busy book. There's lots that happens, but there's not a lot of action to front load. But a murder mystery, I can get people shooting at each other by chapter 3.
And that's the thing. Yeah, unfortunately, pretty much everything I've written on the novel side, I guess, is all written with the idea of it being a movie. Yeah, in my mind, I can visualize it. I see it. I get it. And what I've been wrestling with and thinking about doing is, because I've only just started, with carrying the first manuscript. I've got to transfer everything, all the next one's over and all that nonsense. But I've been contemplating, do I want to just play around and do screenplays for all of them just to see if the flow makes more sense and if that will help the process, and say, all right, if I'm watching a movie of this right now, they're losing me. This is a bathroom break. I'm getting snacks or whatever. How do I keep that flow going? So that it's compelling, and I don't need to entertain myself with my own writing as much as I enjoy it, and I love writing and everything about it. But there does come a point where you say, all right, what's the end game here? I want to get something out there, and I want it to be damn good, and I want people to want to read it, want to see it, whatever it may be. And, it's just, I don't know. When you wake up in the morning, you go, okay, I'm going to do something that's going to be painful all day long today. And ideally, there'll be highs and lows throughout the day. Or worse, there'll be nothing.
No, people look at me very crosswise, and I do this full time. I do the news on one side of my business, and I do fiction on the other. And people say, "Oh, you must love what you do," and I'm like,
I hate
fuck no, absolutely not, absolutely not. And I said, and if any writer comes along and says they do, walk away from them immediately. They're not well. No one likes this. As Emerson famously said, I do not like writing, but I like having written. Summarizes it
absolutely
perfectly. It's great when I can look back at the 2,000 words I wrote yesterday. Fantastic. Great feeling. Not going to enjoy the next 2,000.
It's that's such a vicious... It's honestly such a love-hate thing. And, it's very hard. And when you look at... just the modicum of satisfaction, when you put something out there and it's been picked up by a literary magazine, and then you tweet about it or put about it on social media, and in your mind, this is the greatest thing that could have happened. Hey, this just got picked up by Name the Magazine, or was nominated for a pushcart, or God bless it. And one or two people like the tweet, and you're like, all right, I'm good. I can write again tomorrow now. Somebody liked it. It's amazing how little the barest minimum of satisfaction will allow you to go back and go, all right, I'm going to start again now.
And that's, I think, the thing that's so unique about writing. Most other people who do literally any other jobs would crumble with the sheer lack of support that you get in this sort of creative field. Most people would not work in jobs where you do not get any good feedback hardly ever, and you may need to milk a compliment for years to keep going. Like, you know, no one gets into the stock market because someone walks up to them one time in like 2012 and says, I think you trade stocks okay. And then no one ever says anything to them for the next 10 years. Like, no, Dow Jones.
And that's the thing. We're so preconditioned to instant gratification. And I think that's what kills me more than anything else, because I just, like, I'll look at certain journals that I want to submit a short story to, and when I'll look at their time, they'll say, you know, we try to have a response within 6 months, and I go, oh no, I can't do that. I will find plenty of other, like, I will pay the extra $5 for an expedited rejection. Like, isn't that insane that you will actually pay money when you submit to certain places, and those, you know, for an extra X, you know, we'll have an answer for you within, you know, 3 days, 5 days, whatever, and saying, I need that rejection so fast that I will pay for it. Like, you know, it's...
I know. This is, I mean, longtime readers of this know this. I had quite a hefty drug problem in my 20s. This industry is worse than drugs. This industry has done worse things to me than drugs ever did. And I've done all the drugs, like literally all the drugs. The stuff I put up with from the writing industry.
It's amazing how it's like battered spouse.
Cocaine.
No, it's battered spouse syndrome. Like, I am the beaten dog that I know every time I write something and submit it, I'm going to get beaten. But once every 10 times, whatever it may be, someone's going to go, hey, you know what, this isn't bad. And instantly the tail is wagging, life is good again, and everything's great until I submit the next piece and I get beaten. And it's Pavlovian and just infuriating. And like, I didn't pay for this kind of masochism when I lived in New York City and lived downtown. You know, I don't know. It's just brutal sometimes, but.
Yeah, and there were, you know, 10 women who sell that sort of thing regularly. To see. And
I knew 8 of them, and I still didn't deal with it like that.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just so. That's why I think so many, and I'm one of them. I think that's why so many people who are writing good at this usually have really shitty childhoods. Because we're very good at dealing with rejection, we're very good with getting beaten down and not letting it count. Like, if you had a normal, happy, healthy childhood, I'm sorry, the creative arts are just going to chew you up and spit you out. Your parents told you, and you know,
it's really funny. It's funny you should say that, because I truly believe the next generation of writers, if you will, who come from the whole, like, everyone gets a trophy, everyone's a participant, everyone does, like, when all of a sudden they realize they're getting rejected and can't handle it and they just crumble, like, there's going to be a whole swath of writers when the rest of us die off who just don't get it and can't handle that rejection. They don't have that ability to be like, listen, this was daily life for me forever. Like, I mean,
I'm 32, so I am of that generation, but I'm already seeing that on Twitter where it's like people are breaking down, they're crying, they're having anxiety, all this sort of thing. And I'm just like, oh, my sweet summer child, you are not going to make it in this industry very long. I submitted my first story when I was 16 years old, and it went nowhere and did not do well. I fell for every single writer scam until I could sniff them out like nobody's business. And then I took off for college, and then I wrote some more and figured stuff out. I did a comic books with some friends of mine, and, you know, it never really went anywhere that I wanted it to, and that business collapsed. And by that time, I had already run a magazine that I'd gotten fired from. And then I ran another magazine, and the guy stole all the money, and the publication collapsed. And that started me to actually start writing again and all this sort of thing. Like, all these ups and downs that go with this. Like, if you're having anxiety over submitting,
right,
or you can't handle a single rejection, you're just not going to last here very long. That's the sad
I mean, it takes a thick skin to say the least, but it does come from a level where, you know, writing is a shield, it's a cloak, call it what you will, but you keep writing because you know when all is said and done after the rejection, you know, like, look, this is just another day, right? You know, this is what I know, and sooner or later maybe something works and really clicks, but until then, I'm just going to keep getting beaten, and you know, maybe hopefully I'm learning something through it. And I mean, it's funny when you're in some of these writing groups that have, you know, kids in their early 20s up through, you know, the senior league, if you will. And, you know, and it's just funny hearing these stories. Like, there's so much of a hyper focus, and I, you know, I wrestle with it to some degree. I'll hear more people concerned about, well, the sensitivity didn't cover this, and this was not right, and this isn't, you know, rather than saying, you know, maybe you need to be pushed outside of your comfort zone. And there's a difference between writing something to shock for the sake of shocking, and I don't subscribe to that. But at the same time, you know, real life is not all you know, unicorns and puppies and whatnot. Like, I mean, if you've seen stuff, if you're writing from that perspective.
Oh, I have gotten in fights on Twitter about this and Reddit about this, where it's just kind of like, oh my God, it's like, you know, rape is so cliche, or trauma is so cliche, or you can traumatize someone with their friend leaving them. I'm like, who the I'm going to put explicit on this podcast, so I'm about to curse. Who the fuck goes and buys a bottle of scotch and drinks the whole thing in the middle of the night because their best friend left? Nobody. You do that when real, actual adult shit goes down. Like, this is how life works. I said, there's a way to do it, but ultimately, if you want the stakes to be high, if you want the reader to be compelled, the stakes have to be high. And it was actually, I was surprised, in my first novel, I talk about molestation. That's a touchy subject. And the sensitivity reader didn't even blink an eye.
If you can treat it with the deft touch.
It is one paragraph at the end of one chapter. Yes, it is one paragraph at the end of one chapter. It's not belabored. I don't make a big deal about it.
If you think about it, if Nabokov was putting out Lolita now, the outrage, you know, oh my God, how could you do this? And you're like, you're right, because pedophilia doesn't exist. I forgot, you know. So
interns and staffers would be refusing to work on the book.
And that's Lolita the kind of thing, because unless it's written from, you know, somehow in an empowering angle or whatever, it's like, no, but that's not how the world works. And unfortunately, you can't change the world by trying to write it differently. And I fear that's where things start losing control, because if you can read something and appreciate it and take something from it, that's how you get people to eventually change or react or become more sympathetic versus being reactionary.
And that's our job as artists. That is literally our function in society, is to use art to help people change their mind, because people will oftentimes change their mind about something if there's a story or a painting or a movie or a TV show. Hollywood, you get changed minds far faster that way than just beating them over the head with dry polish.
And you see it in Hollywood.
It's not fun.
The number of times you have, you know, named the actor or actress who, you know, God bless it, Robert Downey Jr., he's going on benders, you know, breaking into people's houses, sleeping there, this and that. You know, he's a disaster. But then also does a couple of roles and now makes a comeback, and now he's beloved. You know, I mean, people want to see that comeback. They want to give people the benefit of the doubt, unless it's just so heinous. And that's what allows you to look and recognize that we're all flawed to some degree. And if you're not flawed, you're definitely not going to be a friend of mine. That much I know. So if we insulate ourselves with others who have that similar issue, and by coming together as a community to put that kind of stuff out there, that's what eventually changes and refocuses minds and points of view. And
absolutely. And you even see the arc. I'm old enough to have watched something like gay rights go from something that was horrifically scandalous to mainstream in the course of my life. I remember when Ellen DeGeneres came out on national television. That was a week-long news cycle. It was national news. It was on every talk show, every newspaper, the cover of every magazine. It was major breaking news.
Oh, I thought it was just a political stunt. I didn't believe it. But all right, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I mean, but the point is that was in 1998.
Well, and that's
how far we've come.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's why I get anxious.
I'm old
when I hear things. I appreciate trigger warnings because I don't want somebody to be, upset by something. But I do.
Oh, for sure.
But I do want someone to feel something. Absolutely. And again. When you have people writing things for the sake of shock value, and it's like, I call it what you want, like shock porn or writing porn or whatever, where it's just to do it for the sake of doing it. I don't like it. But when you can ideally put yourself into it and say, listen, this guy's writing this. He experienced something. You don't just write this in this way without having experienced something. And it's whether it's cathartic, whatever it may be, but there's ways of stuff getting out there that ideally you're drawing in the reader in a sense of empathy. And that's what it should be, rather than just, hey, look at this, horrific scene I just wrote for the sake of being able to do it. Yeah, that doesn't impress me.
Absolutely. And I think that is a good place to end. This has been
I enjoyed this tremendously.
So much fun. I've loved every second of it, and thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. This has been wonderful and amazing and fascinating. This is a great moment for you to plug anything.
Right, listen, for me, I'm learning every day. It's been a journey. If anyone's interested, by all means, I put my short stories out that have been published on my website, thedutchsimmons.com. I'd like to think I'm moderately entertaining. I'm a pain in the ass more than anything else. So you'll find me on Twitter at Dutch Simmons. The Dutch Simmons? I don't even know my own damn Twitter handle. But
we'll put it in the show notes for dear reader, dear listener.
Fantastic.
Don't worry about
I will be. Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I love following you online.
Thank you.
I will be plugging the hell out of this out there, and just wish you more success by all means.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.